fairies, like a fairy, like Tinkerbell thing. That's kind of cute.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That's like Cinderella.
It used to be called Time Warp, but we changed the name and it's Nobody's Baby. And that's from a song that came out in the 1920s that says, I'm nobody's baby now. So I thought the clothes were nobody's baby and they needed to go home with people. So that's why I chose that name from that song. Well, I started out as a collector and a lover of the vintage clear back in the 70s. And I took a class, a crocheting class with a lady in Salem, the capital, and she happened to own a vintage clothing store, so of course I had to go see her store after I met her. And I fell in love with this dress. It was an Edwardian dress, probably from 1915, 16, somewhere in there. And I bought it, and it was my first piece, and it seemed very expensive to me. And it was so sheer and so ethereal that I just fell in love. So then I started haunting thrift stores and other vintage clothing stores and, kept buying more and more. And then I went to work I went to work part-time for a vintage clothing store here in Eugene. And then I ended up buying half of it in the 80s. And then I bought the costume shop, which used to be called Time Warp. And we moved both businesses it was in the McDonald Theater building, so the basements are really neat in that building. And then I had a partner, and then we parted, and that's when I changed the name to Nobody's Baby. After I started collecting, and when I first bought into the store, I started doing a lot of fashion shows. So when I was doing these fashion shows, how I approached them was how women's fashion and the role of women and the rights of women and all those things interacted. So anyway, I did a lot of the fashion shows, and I realized that, what I loved about vintage clothes was just this whole sense of history and how history influenced fashion, and fashion then in some degree, influenced history in its own way too. So that's what kind of got me started, and then once you start being a collector, oh my. That's what I like about vintage clothing, is its individuality and sense of expression. And it's also fun to mix and match eras too. So, to put a hat from one era with a piece of clothing from another can be fun. So you just, what do they call it in cosplay, or whatever, where they mash things together, so you can mash eras together too, and it can be fun if you do it right.